So I'm a huge Batman fan, and especially the Nolan trilogy. I think it's an awesome trilogy. And I watched the Batman when it came out in the cinema. At the time, I thought it was really good film. Different to what was seen in the Snyderverse, which was, I suppose, more of a comic book accurate type character. And the Nolan ones seem to be more realistic. And the Batman tried to be even more realistic, I suppose. Kind of followed the Batman from his early days. It also introduced Colin Farrell as the Penguin, and Colin Farrell was given, I suppose, a tertiary role in the film, and it was one of those roles where you kind of go, oh, it's a pretty cool take, and it was sort of more grounded, different to, like I said, Nolan's Batman. And I think if the Penguin existed in that Nolan verse, then I think it would probably be quite similar to what Matt Reeves did in the Batman. But overall, it's not, it's I suppose, a comic book accurate take in the sense of, he's a mobster, gangster type character. With this one, because it's following the Batman's early days, it's literally means that, the Penguin's climbing the ladder. But also, he's not going to have, I suppose, any kind of props or, kind of more sort of comic booky type outfits and that kind of stuff. It tries to be more realistic, whereas actually dressing up more akin to I suppose, a gangster. And the Penguin, the series itself, it's supposed to give pretty much a story around how the Penguin sort of rises in Gotham after the Batman, and also it tries to sort of tell the backstory of Oswald as well. I'm not sure why they tried to change the name of Oswald, because it's one of those iconic, characters in the Batman series. So I find that part of it to be a bit silly to just call him Cobb. Maybe I know like later on they do sort of mention in the series that Oz is short for Oswald. However, Cobb, they should just call him Cobblepot. I don't think it makes much difference really. And if they wanted to give him a bit of more of a backstory, they could have said they immigrated from the UK or something of that sort, because it is type of one of those kind of names where it's more, I suppose, UK centric. And the Penguin also serves as a side story for Sofia, Falcone. So it's one of those ones where, even though the Penguin is the main character in the story, there's quite a lot of emphasis on the Sofia character as well. So Season 1 focuses mainly on the Penguin's rise, from him going from a lieutenant within the Falcone family to a leader. And what you will also sort of see, he tends to sort of jump sides quite earlier on, and that's kind of revealed in the Batman as well, that he switches from sort of Maroni to the Falcones, which I find a bit odd. I think within, I don't know the gangster world, but I'd find it a bit strange switching over to another family, and whether you can sort of trust that person or not, which kind of plays out within the Penguin series. So in terms of the themes, it has violence, which being the main one really, and obviously, like I said, gangster earlier on, and then there's also power. The Penguin especially is struggling for power, and same for Sofia as well. So both of them, have that, and they also have that theme of trying to get respect from their families, or their and for the Penguin just to get respect overall. And he's one of those characters that is not really come from a family orientated structure, and therefore he's making his own way in the world. And betrayal, I think there's a lot of betrayal going on within this, probably a bit too much, but it's still one of those, again, it wouldn't really exist, I suppose, being within the Batman verse if there wasn't sort of betrayal. And murder is kind of hand in hand with any kind of gangster type series or films. And it also kind of sort of signifies a class system, which is a common theme within this Matt Reeves Batman verse. And I know that is a common theme within the Batman comic book series as well. And the class system plays an important part of that as well, even within this series as well. And mainly being due to, the Penguin coming from a lower class, whilst the Falcones are obviously going more upper class, I suppose, especially over time. And so for that reason, there's that sort of struggle between, understanding people's needs, what the people from working class want from Gotham, and then also, looking at how the elite live and run through life, which is easier for them. And that's, again, a common theme within the Batman verse, and Nolan's universe touched upon that as well. And, you know, obviously it tells a story between the Falcones and Maronis, that double sort of story between the two different families. And again, similar to something like The Godfather and also things like The Sopranos as well. And from Penguin's himself as a character, you kind of find out, you know, his sort of neediness really, and him having sort of trust issues, and then maybe even going towards mental health issues, and that kind of covers both Sofia and also the Penguin. So with the main characters, I think you know the Penguin is the main protagonist, probably guessed, and the show is mainly about him. And like I said, he's kind of rise from a soldier, being a needy, and basically having no loyalty really. So he comes from a a place where he is serving himself really, and you know his own agenda, and just climbing up the ladder. So I don't feel like he has particularly any kind of loyalty to anyone apart from say his mum. And I think Sofia kind of plays this anti-hero, so she's not quite the establishment. She's trying to, you know, when she was younger, she was trying to sort of break away from that. And I suppose, in a way, she was innocent, and then it sort of developed into, I suppose, an unhealthy obsession after being sort of locked away in Arkham, and, you know, then kind of being out for revenge, and maybe even have that sort of redemption arc, which she never quite achieves. And I think the main third character within the series is Victor. And I think Victor, you know, comes from a place of working class and has that sort of parallel background with the Penguin on his own, trying to make, you know, a way through life. And he also has kind of like a nervous stammer, similar to the Penguin, who has problems walking. So they both have those kind of disabilities, and I think they, you know, the Penguin kind of sort of sees himself within Victor. And he's just, like I said, just sort of trying to sort of navigate life. I don't think he's kind of got those morals of, you know, as he's growing up, of understanding, you know, what's good, what's bad. And you do have a bit of a sense of what's good and what's bad, but it just depends on what life throws at you and how you sort of tend to sort of tackle that, and whether you go down the path of, I guess, you know, in simple terms, going down that bad path or going down that good path, and trying to sort of navigate through life. So with the pacing, I think you know the Penguin itself as a show is quite high bar really. I think comparing it to other comic book shows, especially ones more recent, and maybe that also shows the fact that a lot of them have been subpar. So a lot of these Marvel shows, for example, and they're obviously different in tone. Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and then you have things like She-Hulk and also other Marvel series, and those, you know, just didn't really hit the bar. And I think even some of the, I suppose what they term the Arrowverse, I think even those, you know, kind of sort of checked out after the first few seasons of, say, the Arrow and the Flash. I think they kind of went on for a bit too long. And for me, I think they were good, but especially in the first few seasons, but then they kind of sort of tailed off. And I think the only one that came close, in my perspective, is something like the Titans, but that is more comic book accurate, but that was also quite sort of violent and dark at the same time. But the Penguin is obviously more grounded. But I think with the pacing, you know, I kind of tried to put the ratings on here, but the pacing in terms of general of how it sort of sat together, there's, you know, you're going from sort of episode 1, which was, I suppose, starting off being trying to sort of explain where it sort of left off from the Batman, and same for episode 2 really. And I think when it gets to sort of episode 3 and 4, that's when it sort of sparks up and becomes something else, and something, you know, very interesting, and telling the sort of story of Sofia and also the Penguin and his backstory. I think you know, they were done really, really well. I suppose the Penguins one probably could have been fleshed out a lot more over 2 episodes, but I think it still, you know, served a pretty good story as to his sort of thinking and his sort of background. And then going into sort of episode 5 and 6 and 7, I think that's when it sort of started to sort of feel a bit sort of padded out, where I feel like, you know, once it got to episode 8, you know, that was a really good episode, and kind of closed the whole sort of season off quite well. If I was to kind of critique the overall pacing, I think over, like, if they kind of changed it to sort of 4 episodes, I think it would have been pitch perfect. And for me, I think even if they did sort of 4 episodes and condensed it to 4 episodes and released it, you know, as a film instead, I think it would have been very well received, and with a slightly sort of higher budget in terms of the overall look and feel. So with the story, I'm going to give that a 4. I think it was told very well. There's a lot of backing and forthing. I think that's my only issue with the Penguin, especially with Sofia and the Penguin himself. Without sort of spoiling too much, they have a lot of to and froing where they sort of capture each other and kind of get manage to escape, or, you know, what have you, which is a bit kind of played out, especially after the third time that happens. And then also the overall set design, it very much matches the Batman film in terms of the aesthetics and how it looks. I don't think it quite lives up to the same style and the groundedness, and obviously has a more of a higher budget, but it still looks very similar. I think that's my only sort of critique with the set design. That's why I've given it a 4. But the overall cinematography and the way it's been shot, and the close-ups that you have, and the set pieces, all that kind of stuff is done very, very well. And they try not to, go too much in terms of having a big budget where they're mashing up a whole bunch of cars or having like these extended action scenes. But what they've done with it, there's a lot more sort of dialogue type cinematography going on, and it's still very cool. And the audio is very similar to what was in the Batman, so quite sort of gritty, quite sort of played down. And I didn't notice it too much whilst I was watching it, which is sometimes you do. But I think some of the tracks that they chose pretty much suited the series itself. And that's why overall I'm going to give the score a 4. I think for me, the aspect of it kind of missing out on a 5 is just because it's just felt like a bit too padded out. And like I said, the to and froing from the Penguin getting captured, a bunch of times, and same for Sofia. I think they could have made that a lot more tighter, and I think it would have been a better product for it. But I do like the overall themes, and I do like the groundedness. However, sometimes I feel like with things like anything that's a comic book take, not to say they can't be grounded, but I feel like with this, there's, at the end of the day, there's a Batman out there that's dressed as a bat. So, so how much more realistic can you get, really? But it's still a cool series, and one of the best ones to come out in the last few years. But the bar hasn't been too high, and I think maybe if this came out at the time of other series, that were rated really high in terms of the comic book world, I think maybe you'd probably not look at it in the same light. But I think there's been a lot of crap that's come out recently, especially in the last sort of 3-4 years, versus something like this, which I think is very, very good and definitely worth watching, and especially if you're into Batman.